For the past couple of years, fast fashion has become extremely popular with people my age. With the rising popularity of websites like Shein, Zara, and many others alike, overconsumption is rising. In the spring of 2020, during the beginning of COVID and the first of our lockdowns, I, like many others, spent day after day stuck at home with my parents and our dogs, which kind of drove me a little insane. So after that, I started looking at Pinterest and other websites like that, and I started to notice a lot of these websites like Shein and others like I just mentioned. Many of them have marketing that can make them pretty enticing to young adults like myself, because who wouldn't want cheap but cute clothes? They're geared toward teenagers and young adults with the promise of cheap, trendy clothing with a somewhat decent quality. If you can think of it, they will likely have it. From designer knockoffs to the most niche micro-trends that you can think of. Over the past couple of years, people grow into different styles and phases, and these pieces of fast fashion have taken over thrift shops and landfills alike, and this problem is showing no signs of stopping in the near future. My topic for today is fast fashion. This topic is something that's quite interesting to me, and I look forward to talking about it today. Upon reading articles to find information to include in this speech, I found several pieces that spoke about the consequences of overconsumption, hoarding behaviors, and impulsive spending were two topics that came up very often. Another thing from this is how fast fashion also began to color thrift stores, as many of these items go in and out of style at a fast pace. I read an article published by Isabella Paz for the New York Times on July 7, 2022, that spoke about how these brands have taken over thrift stores. If you were to walk and say Goodwill or America's Thrift, I always forget how to talk during these speeches. You can walk over to these racks and you'll notice a lot of these fast fashion brands. I spent a lot of time researching for this speech in several ways, from looking at articles online to experience some of these things for myself in stores. Last week when I started to write for this speech, I went to Plato's Closet, which if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's basically just a thrift store geared towards young adults for clothes, obviously. As I walked in, I seen a huge amount of Shein in all sizes on every rack. And the weirdest thing about this to me is that many of these items were the exact same, just in different sizes. This would have came to a shock to me if this was a wholesale store, but Plato's Closet is a buy here, sell here store, meaning that all these items have gotten brought in by people just like me and you. I've seen stories of people taking in very high quality items to Plato's Closet and getting them rejected, but they take in these huge influxes of Shein, which is kind of shocking to me. In my opinion, I don't think these items should be bought for resale by places like Plato's Closet for a couple of reasons. Shein clothing is very cheap. Most pieces on their website range from $10 to $15, and Plato's Closet or Goodwill, anywhere like that, is going to sell them for the exact same price to make a profit off of them. When these items are then resold to the stores, they're the exact same price, therefore you're spending more money on something that's not going to last any amount of time. Today, my main goal is for my audience to understand where I'm coming from in this speech and for them to see things from a different point of view. I grew up thrifting and I cherish it dearly. However, thrifting today is not the same that it was a couple of years ago, and this is because of mass overconsumption. I've seen several videos online of individuals showing off their massive hauls from brands such as Shein, and these hauls are costing upwards to $1,000. The biggest question that needs to be asked in this case is if all the stuff is really needed. Would you rather have $1,000 in cheap, overproduced materials that won't last, or quality of clothes that are guaranteed to last a couple of years? Sustainability is something that more people need to be concerned about. As companies start a new trend about greenwashing, which is basically just a marketing scheme to make consumers think that their products are magically eco-friendly now, this is something that many brands of fast fashion have done, such as Boohoo, who hired Kourtney Kardashian to be their sustainability ambassador, or how Sprite changed the colors of their bottle from the green tint that we all knew to a clear bottle so that consumers would stop recognizing their bottles and landfills. In an article published by Sam Chambers for the Sunday Times, it talks about companies doing this. An example, Shein had a $3 eco-friendly tote bag for sale. I find this concept funny almost. There is absolutely nothing eco-friendly about Shein, so why are they trying to seem like they are? The overconsumption of fast fashion is unethical. Fast fashion has a dark side, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about it. There are many problems arising from it, such as addictive behaviors, changes to our climate and the environment, and sustainability. I have a couple of main topics I'd like to share with y'all that are related to this today. Shopping addictions can be serious and can be prevented. But how can we prevent it? By changing our views on fast fashion. It has also caused emissions to rise, as most of these companies ship for overseas via airplanes. Lastly, many studies have proven that these clothes aren't sustainable and don't last, which has caused consumers to spend more. By hearing some of the things already mentioned, it's clear to see that there's more to fast fashion than most people would think. For starters, fast fashion has caused shopping addictions for many individuals. In an article published by Leah Payne for Alive, which is a Canadian magazine, titled "Don't Fall for Fast Fashion," we learn about how fast fashion is made and why it's caused such addictions. For example, these clones have shown not to be lasting for very long, which has caused consumers to buy more than what would typically be needed. In a study done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we discovered that around half of all fast fashion produced is thrown away within the next year. To me, that was a shocking statistic. Why are we producing such a large amount of clothes? Is it really needed? A second side to this is that due to the influx of clothes being produced, they're typically cheaper, which has caused consumers to buy more than what is needed. An example from this article, suppose a store is selling shirts for $5 and you buy one in every color. Then within the next year, you're throwing them out simply due because you haven't worn them. The article states that we're buying 60% more clothing than we bought 15 years ago. Why is that? Because these companies release new styles so often, there's no way for everything to be bought at full price. Therefore, sales are triggered constantly, and what do people do during a big sale? Buy more than what's needed. In an article published by Isabella Paz for the New York Times, it talks about the overflow of fast fashion brands and thrift stores. And this is due to these large unnecessary hauls that can be found on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok. These hauls just encourage overconsumption, said Megan McSherry, a sustainable fashion educator. I've seen hauls of people buying boxes and boxes worth of clothes from places like Shein, and it's just not possible to wear all of these items. And whatever gets donated usually ends up sitting in thrift stores or, worst case, a landfill. Alright, the constant cycle of changing trends has also played a part in overconsumption. Micro trends have become more and more popular as time goes, and fast fashion has learned to keep up with this. Many items for sale on Shein's website as of current are considered micro trends, and more continue to pop up. However, once these styles are no longer on trend, they're likely to either be donated or thrown out. The simplest solution to this problem is to not give in to micro trends. Look into building a capsule wardrobe, which is something that's very sustainable in the long run. If you're buying these long-lasting items that you wear daily, you will end up realizing that you don't need these micro trends because you're obviously. Secondly, fast fashion has played its own part in climate change. In an article published by Sam Chambers for the Sunday Times titled "Fast Fashion's Dirty Secret Is Growing Too Big to Ignore," it covered many topics, with climate change being one of the biggest. Is our love of fast fashion hurting our environment? Research is saying yes. Many people love to find bargains while shopping for clothes, but it's clear that there's a bigger price to pay for this. Last year, Shein's revenue was a little over $12 billion, according to estimates done by Coresight Research. With how cheap their products are, it's clear that they are selling mass amounts to reach that type of revenue. And with their shipments coming from overseas, that means that they consistently have a plane on standby. As I talked about in my last speech, emissions are a big part of climate change, and airplanes are one of the biggest issues that comes from this. The fashion industry has already been said to handle more than a quarter of the world's carbon budget by 2050, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's obvious we can't count on these companies to regulate their emissions amongst other things on their own. However, at the same time, it's clear that our government isn't doing much to try and regulate them either. In an article published by Vivian Walt for Fortune, it talks about Zara specifically. Zara is one of the biggest fashion retailers today, and their impacts on our climate is shocking to say the least. In estimates, they sell approximately 450 million items a year. That's around 856 pieces a minute. Every day in and out. Their speed in designing new pieces, their price, and the sheer volume is greatly damaging to our environment, as said in the article. Because of this, we need to see a much needed change, but these companies are refusing to do so, it seems. Between 2000 and 2015, brands upped their production from 50 million to 100 million garments each year. The consequences of this are detrimental to our environment. This is a huge question needed to be asked here. Can these companies manage to keep their production at such a large number and have ethical practices? Truthfully, it doesn't seem possible. And finally, I'm going to talk about how many of these brands aren't making their clothes in a sustainable, long-lasting way, which can cause more spending overall. In an article published by Mary Cree for the Daily Mail titled, "Would Your Fashion Bargains Pass the 30-Wear Test?" it talked about how the fast fashion industry is broken. For example, with how clothing is made from these types of conditions that don't last very long. It talked about an experiment done on several brands to see how many wears they can withhold before damage starts to occur. On fast fashion websites, you're going to notice that many of these items are so cheap, you might even be tempted to throw them away after one wear. A $5 dress that you wear once, you might think that it's fine because it's not like you spent a good bit on it. Alongside that, in the experiment I mentioned moments ago, that was done by an independent lab, STTC's test laboratory, on specific types of clothing and brands. The experiment had too many results for me to talk about today, however, many of them did not pass the test, which wasn't shocking to me. Sustainable clothing is something that's very, very important. Even if you're potentially spending more money up front, you're going to get your money's worth. For example, I have a pair of jeans from Madewell, which is a sort of luxury sustainable brand. At full price, these jeans are close to $140, and I bought these thrifting with the tag still on them a couple of years ago, and they still look brand new. There's no pilling, no ripping, nothing, and I wear them very often. In fact, I wore them to my last speech. Their quality shocked me, especially considering I usually see declining in my jeans after a couple of weeks to a month or so. But 2 years, that's pretty crazy to me. There are lots of sustainable brands, and a good bit of them can be affordable. Some of my favorite sustainable brands are Big Bud Press, even though it's very pricey, and Girlfriend Collective, which has some very, really nice basics and decent sales often. Fast fashion is something that is likely going to stick around regardless of what we do. However, that doesn't mean we need to support them. In this speech, I had a goal of persuading my audience to see the dangers of fast fashion. I covered many areas of this topic, such as how fast fashion has the capability of causing shopping addictions, changes in our climate, and how some of these brands are making sustainable, lasting clothing, which is causing more spending in the long run. So, are you guys going to think twice before you buy from a fast fashion market? I think something that everybody learned today was that sometimes bargains aren't worth the price that you pay in the long run. Does my audience have any questions today?